Okay, I thought I'd make a really quick video to Lee Remini, this awesome celebrity who is going after Scientology and this amazing. Well, first she did an amazing series on cable TV, and she's still doing it. And it's pretty cool. I don't know how much she's doing it as far as broadcasts, but I have a little story that I think she would like to hear about, and she might want to interview me about it. Just by luck, I was exposed to this. It was just by luck that I interviewed at Diskeeper software in Burbank, California, and just by luck that I wound up working on several contracts at Microsoft. So, people like Bob Lazar, they're just lucky to have been exposed at the right place at the right time and do the right things to get notoriety. And it's not. That's just nature of fame, perhaps, I guess, being in the right place at the right time. But, so first of all, I want to talk about Diskeeper. When I interviewed there, I found out right away that it was somehow connected to Scientology. I after the interview, did a lot of research, and I talked to ex-Scientologists, and they say that it's not technically a Scientology front. Their boss he's a Scientologist, he buys into this like business plan that some Scientology execs put together by taking a lot of quotes of L. Ron Hubbard's out of context and showing the proper way to have a successful business. And if you're really into that, you just fall into that, and that's how you run your business. It was a very weird interview, and I don't want to get into all the bizarre stuff that happened, but one of the things that happened was they gave me an IQ test, and I was, without knowing what I was getting into, when I was told that before the interview, I was pretty excited because I thought, wow, I never interviewed a job where they actually, use my intelligence as a factor for getting hired. And so I was pretty excited about that. And then it was really strange. And that's something I'm going to put in my book. I'm writing a book, and there's going to be chapters about different religions, and this is going to be a chapter in my personal experience with Scientology, because Scientology, what I'm telling you right now is, because of what Scientology had influenced, it hurt millions and millions of people, or impacted in a negative way many people all over the world. In fact, most people that own a personal computer, in some small degree. It was just a little bit of harm spread out all over the world. So I think that this would be something you'd be interested in hearing about. I mean, we can talk about how bad Scientology is and how people should get out of it, but I think the general public should know that Scientology is bad, and this takes things up to another level, I think. So, after my interview at Diskeeper, by luck, I got a job as a contractor at Microsoft, in Microsoft headquarters, and I was involved in a number of projects, and I got into a conversation with some people without telling them that I worked at Diskeeper. They would tell me certain things about how that led me to figure out what happened to Microsoft because of Diskeeper. So, this is how the story kind of pieces together. Microsoft had Diskeeper's software on their computer, on part of their operating system. They didn't want to bother making their own defragmenter. They just went ahead and got another company to put it there that had a lot of success with it. So they didn't have to actually develop it themselves. So they had a business relationship with this company that makes a defragmenter. And very briefly, I want to tell you what a defragmenter is in case you don't know. At one time, computers didn't have solid-state hard drives like they do now, like laptops do. They had literally a device that had physical disks in it, and they had a little magnetic reader and writer that would go along that disk. Now, as you write and delete files from the hard drive over time can get fragmented. And how that works is like this. If you want to delete something from your hard drive, just like if you want to remove a house or a business from reality, You don't have to tear down the house necessarily. You just have to remove its address so that it's invisible to the little needle that reads and writes stuff. And when someone writes a new file to your hard drive, just like if they're going to build a new house, that's when you deal with tearing down what's already there and replacing with something new. And sometimes what you put new is bigger than what that lot is, and so you have to kind of build half of it and then find the next vacancy and then build the rest of the house, a half. Just like you would add a file to your disk drive, and then if that lot's not big enough, if space isn't big enough, if it's too big of a file, then you add the rest of it in the next available space, and you put a little address at the end of that lot to go to the next visible space. So over time, these files can get kind of fragmented and be placed in different places on your hard drive, and the little reader would go, and you could actually hear it. Sometimes it was a huge file and you're reading it, and it would slow down the reading and writing process involved in just using your computer when you make new files and delete files and etc. So all a fragment does is read up all the files at once and then puts it all back in order so that everything runs smoothly. Now, Microsoft had this defragment software part of their operating system, and they thought nothing was a big deal about it until they started selling the Windows 95 and Windows 98, etc. operating systems overseas. Once they did that, they ran into some problems that they had no way of knowing they were going to run into. Germany wouldn't buy it. They wouldn't let Windows computers and operating systems into their country because they have very strict anti-cult laws. And once they found out that this company, Diskeeper, which they regarded as being a Scientology front organization, was part of the Windows operating system, and that what Diskeeper does is analyze data on someone's hard drive in a very, very close and precise way. And at one time, they wanted to see the source code of Diskeeper, and Diskeeper wasn't part of Microsoft, and so Diskeeper said no. So Microsoft was stuck. They didn't want to blatantly write their own disk-keeping software and fire Diskeeper. That would be a massive public fiasco. It would be a massive, terrible thing that the Diskeeper might sue them. And so they had to find a way to solve this problem without losing face and without making it an obvious event showing hatred towards Diskeeper and Scientology. They didn't want to cause any kind of big brouhaha. So their plan was to just make an entirely new operating system for reasons that would not be obvious for reasons that would appear to be have nothing to do with Diskeeper at all. So that's why they created Vista. Now, whenever a product is taken to market, it has to be tested so that it's okay. And in the software world, that means it doesn't have a lot of bugs. In the pharmaceutical world, to draw a comparison, they have to weigh the lawsuits that where things go wrong with the drug versus the amount of profit they're going to get from the drug. And they also have to have, because of truth in advertising laws, they have to say what all those side effects are whenever they advertise the product. In the software world, a similar thing takes place where no software is completely bug-free. There's always some combination of things that if you test it long enough, you're going to come up with things. But there's a whole category of employees at large software companies that are just testers. and they run all these automatic tests on software. And they don't sit there and physically test it, but usually time in software development and test, they run test programs against the software to try to find little flaws. So they tried to get the number of bugs down to the minimum, but they also have to weigh it against getting the thing out as fast as possible. And with the cases with Vista, they had to get they had to get that German market before their competitors would get it. See? So Vista was rushed to market knowing that there was a lot of bugs in it, because they had to get the profitability of getting a foothold in the German marketplace before it was completely taken over by other operating systems, their competitors, the other companies that made operating systems, their competitors. Now, Vista was buggy, and I got Vista. Actually, I got Vista before I knew all this inside secret. And just by putting 2 different antivirus programs on my Vista operating system, the thing went to blue screen. Blue screen of death. It killed it. And while I was trying to reinstall the operating system, do other things, and it all involved dealing with antivirus stuff that the thing would crash. It crashed for many different reasons on other people's computers I'd heard about. And at the time I thought, why the hell was this thing brought to market? It doesn't make any sense. And shortly afterwards, Microsoft released another operating system in a short period of time that didn't have all these bugs, that they had managed to, after they got the foothold in the German market, they could release a better operating system and then replace that. It was all just a strategy. But the point I want to make is that the Vista operating system was a public nuisance, and it was a public nuisance that everyone had the burden to endure that had a Windows-based computer, a Microsoft-based computer. So on some small level, the evil of Scientology, just like a domino effect, it affected this, and it affected that, and it affected that, and it affected that. So people that weren't expecting this calamity were having to deal with this. Germany had to deal with this. The German people had to deal with this, of not having good, home-based computers that the rest of the world had. The German government had to deal with this nuisance. Microsoft had to deal with this nuisance, and everyone that had a Microsoft computer had to deal with this evil that was generated by Scientology and the people working at Diskeeper. I could read all the employees that had worked there and the horrible things that they say about having to work there. If you didn't become a Scientologist, they made your life pretty bad. And if you were in the pharmaceutical, no, not the pharmaceutical. If you were in the industry where it deal with psychiatry. If you were a customer of Diskeeper and you were a psychiatrist or a psychiatrist secretary, there were horror stories that were printed on public, in social media and on the public about all that. So this is something probably a lot of people don't know. And the only reason why I know it is I was at the right place at the right time, and I was exposed to all this. Now I could go into more detail about how bizarre the interview was, but I'm going to save that. If you want to interview me, I could talk about that. And I'm writing a book now, and there are different chapters in the book about different religions, and Scientology is going to be a brief chapter as well. And so I made it pretty close to 14 minutes in this video, and I hope that wasn't too long.